so you've got plenty of money in the bank, plus you're earning a lot of money as well, you're going to be much more likely to spend on some things, invest in more things, because you know, I've got savings in the bank, plus I've got regular money coming in. Exact same with the body, okay? You've got fat stores there. Good. We're going to be fine even if we don't have a bit of food for a little while. Plus, we've got regular food coming in. That's more than what we need. All right, let's start to build muscle. Okay. Hey guys, welcome to the RMH Project. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing, do you need to be in a calorie surplus to be able to build muscle? Now, if you haven't been to the channel before, welcome. My name is Ryan. I'm an ex and a role player, online coach, and natural bodybuilder. And this channel is all about how to get jacked. Okay, so we are in episode 5 of the How to Get Jacked series. The previous 4 episodes, if you haven't already watched, definitely go back and watch them, as this is a bit more nutrition focused and the previous one's a bit more training focused. So definitely go back and watch those if you haven't already. But without further ado, we'll get into today's episode. Now, I want to start it off by saying you don't have to be in a calorie surplus to be able to build muscle. You can definitely build muscle at a calorie maintenance. You can definitely build muscle in a calorie deficit as well. But if you are looking to maximize your muscle growth, I would definitely recommend being in a surplus, especially if you are a few years into your training as well, where gains aren't going to come as easily. Okay, you probably need that a little bit of an extra edge. So you probably need a little bit of a calorie surplus to be able to maximize that muscle growth. All right. Now, you probably would have heard the saying when it comes to any sort of transformation, you know, nutrition's 80% of the journey, training's only 20%. Now, I don't really love this saying purely because training and nutrition work synergistically together. Okay. Now, I like to think of it is, say if you're going to a destination, okay, and the destination was the goal in this analogy. So whether you want to get shredded, whether you want to put on muscle, okay, that is the destination that you're trying to get to. Now, training is like the vehicle that you'll use to get to that destination, okay, and nutrition is like the driver. All right, so you can have the best training, but if you don't have someone to be able to drive the car to the destination, you're never going to get to that destination, okay? And the same goes with even if you had a driver, but if you had a poor car or poor training, you're probably not going to get there as fast, okay? So they very much work together in that way. So just remember that nutrition, yes, is going to drive you and direct you to that goal, okay? So if you wanted to lose fat, obviously you need to be in a calorie deficit. If you want to put on as much muscle as you want, you probably need to be in a calorie surplus as well. But also you need to make sure that you're training well to be able to require the building blocks to be able to build muscle, okay? We need that stimulus from training, and depending on how good your training is will depend on how good the stimulus is as well. So they very much work together. So try not to get lost in thinking nutrition is all the be all and end all, when training plays a massive factor, especially when it comes to building muscle, okay? Now, how much of a surplus should you be in? Now, this will depend on your training age. So whether you're a beginner, so this is usually around like sort of the first 2 or 3 years of someone's training, okay, would be classified as roughly beginner. Intermediate would be like 3 to sort of like 7. And this is consistent training as well. It's not like, oh, like I trained for a year and then took 6 months off. And if you take 6 months off, you generally will go back to sort of beginner status, okay? So to think of this as like purely you've been training for X amount of time consistently, you've been tracking, you've been putting your best foot forward to make sure that the training is quite effective as well. So very rarely will we come across people that are in the like advanced stage, which is like 7 years plus, okay, of like consistent training where they're tracking over time, progressing at lifts and stuff like that, and ticking the other boxes like nutrition and stuff, which we're about to talk about now. So if you are a beginner, you can be in the higher end of a calorie surplus because the stimulus that you got to get from training is going to be so effective and so powerful that you will build more muscle than someone who has an older training age, okay? So I would tend to recommend a higher calorie surplus to really capitalize on that extra powerful stimulation that you're going to get from training because it's your first time being exposed to it or relatively new being exposed to it. So I would recommend a higher calorie surplus for that. Yes, you might put on a little bit of fat, but I would argue that the potential for muscle growth and the muscle growth that you're going to get and really capitalizing on that muscle growth is worth maybe taking 10 weeks or so to trim down a little bit of the fat that you accumulate along the way whilst you maintain all the muscle gain that you've just had, okay? Now, if you're intermediate, you would tend to be sort of around maybe a 500 calorie per day surplus. Sorry, for beginners, you're probably looking at maybe close to like 750, okay? But if you're an intermediate, you probably go around 500 calories a day. And then if you're advanced, you'd probably be looking at 250, maybe even 200, okay? So just think the more advanced you are and the longer you've been training, okay, you probably want to be on the lower end of a calorie surplus. Now, this also takes into account that you're at sort of an ideal body fat percentage to be able to put on muscle. Now, what does an ideal percentage to put on body fat percentage to put on muscle look like? Now, generally for most people, it's going to be about 12 to 15%. Okay, so roughly more around that sort of like 15% mark, okay? This is just to make sure that you have a decent amount of body fat to be able to put energy towards being able to build muscle, okay? Now, sort of like to think of this as your body fat reserves is kind of like saving money, okay? So if you were earning a good wage, okay, but you didn't have any savings behind you, you're going to be less likely to go spend money and invest money. You're probably going to be more likely to try and save, okay? Now, this is the same as if we have a low body fat percentage, so like 10% or less. Your body is going to be less likely to invest money or invest calories and energy into building muscle. It's going to be more likely want to store fat first so it has some energy reserves, okay? And that's the same as if you were investing or saving money. You sort of want a bit of savings before you start to go investing and start to go spending your money. It's just your body does the same thing. So when we get closer to sort of that 12 to 15% body fat range, and we are eating in a calorie surplus, this is like us having a really good savings. So you've got plenty of money in the bank, plus you're earning a lot of money as well. You're going to be much more likely to spend on some things, invest in more things, because you know, I've got savings in the bank, plus I've got regular money coming in. Exact same with the body, okay? You've got fat stores there. Good. We're going to be fine even if we don't have a bit of food for a little while. Plus, we've got regular food coming in. That's more than what we need. All right, let's start to sort of build muscle. Okay, so that's sort of how the body works. So if you are sub 10%, definitely recommend first getting up to that 12 to 15%. Now, everyone's a little bit different. Some people might be closer to 10%. Some people might even be closer to 20%, okay? Now, this I generally judge by how well your sleep's going and how good you feel at training, how energy feels at training. If you feel a little bit tired, a little bit lethargic at training, maybe you might be one of those guys that might need to be higher up in the body fat percentage, okay? So don't want to get too caught up in the weeds in this, but just remember that you should have a decent amount of body fat on you before you start your build phase and before we start to think about going into what kind of calorie surplus and how long we're going to spend into it, okay? Now, this is all good and well, but how do we know that we're actually putting on muscle? It can be a very hard thing, okay? We can take photos, but obviously over time, you're going to put on a little bit more body fat. It's going to be hard to tell, am I actually getting big or is it just body fat? Kind of hard to tell that for just taking photos. We can take circumference measurements, but again, as body fat goes up, circumference measures are going to go up. Is that really muscle or again, is that body fat? And we can take scale weight. Obviously, we can track our weight over time, but again, how do we tell whether it's body fat? How do we tell the muscle? There's a lot of numbers being thrown around here, but it's going to be obviously hard to tell if we're actually putting on muscle or if it's body fat. Okay. Now, what I like to do for the short term is just make sure that body weight is ticking up over time. That guarantees that we're in a surplus, okay? We definitely don't want to be in a calorie deficit or at calorie maintenance, okay? We sort of want to be on that surplus to maximize the training that we're doing, ensure that we're actually laying down or potentially laying down some muscle tissue. And then from there, just seeing how our lifts are progressing, okay? Now, we don't have to be progressing every week, especially if you're more of an advanced trainee. If you're a beginner, then yeah, probably you should be looking to either add a rep or a little bit of weight each week. But we want to make sure that over time that our training is progressing. And a really good short-term way of checking this is, say, every 12 weeks or so, you might want to do like a random machine movement that you never do, okay? Now, there's two ways to increase strength. Neurological, where you get better at the movement, so almost like the skill is more refined the more you do it, so therefore you'll get stronger, okay, at the movement. But there's also the muscle tissue aspect. So the more muscle tissue you have, the better you're going to be able to push, or whether you're going to be able to pull the load that you're trying to do. So by using a random machine-based movement that doesn't require much skill, that you don't do often, it's going to be more likely that you're going to get a better indication that the strength that you've acquired at that movement is probably going to be from the tissue that you've laid down, okay, not from the neurological gain, because you do it often, okay. So I'd recommend doing something like, say, machine chest press. Do it just before you start your training block, and then maybe 12 weeks into it, you try it again. See if you've improved in reps at that. Because you haven't done that machine, because you haven't been practicing that movement, any gains that you get is probably going to be from the muscle that you put on. So that's a really good midterm one to look at if you actually are putting on muscle. And then probably the gold standard and the long-term progression, and to long-term make sure that you're putting on muscle, is to take a photo at X weight, go through your build phase, and then potentially when you go into a bit of a cut and you get back down to that weight, take photos of that same point. So that may be 12 months apart, that may be 9 months apart. We've gone through a long build phase and then you've cut down to the same weight. And if you take a photo at the same weight, you're generally going to get a good indication, okay, if you're leaner at that second photo, you'll probably put on muscle because you're at the same weight, but you've got less body fat. So therefore, it has to be muscle tissue that you've put on to be able to be at the same weight, but be leaner. So that's sort of a long-term progression. But as I said, for the short-term, guys, just make sure that your body weight's moving up incrementally each week. Again, if you're a beginner, you probably want to be a little bit faster moving up through the body weight. If you're more advanced, you probably want to be a little bit slower, but just making sure that we are moving up, because that means we're in a calorie surplus. And then from there, just sort of checking that your progression and your performance in the gym is going up over time. That's a really good short-term way to just make sure that you're on the right track. All right, guys. So hopefully this has been helpful. As always, guys, do those good things, like, subscribe, share. If you want anything more discussed in the future, please do let me know. But yeah, until then, I'll see you in the next one.